Let's have it.
Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you're listening to this podcast, right? Because we just don't know. Do we, Antoine? Do we know when they're listening?
No, we don't. We just hope y'all listening. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
Just listen.
Yeah, we hope you're listening from Germany or from, Saskatchewan or wherever you're listening from. Because, Lord knows we are saying important things, aren't we?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Life-changing things, things that could change the trajectory of communities and futures. Absolutely.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? So we're putting that all out there because we're not here to just kind of, stroke ourselves here. We're Antoine and I, we have no egos that we need to boost except to see the kingdom of God and the kingdom of truth reign over a time where there are few people that are willing to stand up, even people that are supposedly, men and women of God that are willing to stand up and say, this isn't right. There's something, this does not fit with the rest of the gospel. I don't get it.
You're absolutely right. The Bible says the world is waiting for the manifestation of the sons of God, those that kept the Lord's commandments and are applying them. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and loving people as you love yourself. We have fulfilled everything, but we're not loving. That's what the root thing is. We're not loving. We haven't been loving as a country forever. So that's what. All right.
You're right. I mean, you see that manifested in all kinds of ways. If you're gonna love people, one of the first things you try to do, I mean, I think, is think of your family members when they get into bad situations. Loving them isn't starting out by saying, I told you that was the stupidest thing you ever could have done. Loving on people in those situations looks more like, gosh, that sounds awful. What tell me more about what happened. What were you doing? And you may be thinking that's the stupidest thing anyone could ever do, but you don't understand the whole situation. And until you ask the questions and until you show empathy for the fact that, hey, they made a dumb decision. I don't remember me ever being absolved or, immune to making dumb decisions myself. Right?
I made a few of those. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Still do sometimes.
Just a few, right? Oh, jeez. So, anyways, what are we doing here, Antoine? What is the purpose of this podcast?
This is a frame of reference coming together. Where you got an older white guy and a semi-old black guy.
Hey, come on, man. That's not fair. Some older white guy and a semi-older. Why don't you just say a young stud of a black guy and an old? Yeah, we should do something like that.
I turned, like I said, I crossed 50. My wife is like, okay, you're hanging up the cape. It's like, my body is telling me the same. It's like,
hanging up the cape.
That thing you did at 30, nope. That thing you did at 24, nope.
What's that? Have you ever seen The Incredibles? Where
I have not.
Oh God, you gotta see that movie. There's a point where Mr. Freeze is like, "Woman, where's my super cape?" She's like, don't you dare take that tone with me. It's just so hilarious. So, but anywho, yeah, we do. I had to hang up my cape a long time ago. If I had kept my cape, maybe I would have flown all the way to that garbage can that struck my head a couple weeks back. But don't know for sure. Yeah. Anyways, yes, frame of reference. Coming together. Today, I asked if we could talk about a subject which is gets a lot of people's rankles up, I think. And I'm all for getting rankles up because the only way you deal with things is to get rankles up. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous. You don't get better from being an alcoholic until you can recognize that you're an alcoholic. And that's why they say in AA, hello, my name's Raul and I'm an alcoholic, because you have to recognize it. And everyone that I've known that went through AA has said it wasn't comfortable. Coming to grips with that, agreeing, recognizing it, one of the hardest things they did. So the same is true,
folks.
The
first thing is confessing it, right?
Yeah.
You have to confess it and acknowledge it and confess it and be like, yeah, that's how you start to go through it.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep. And you end up being, in this case, we're talking about another one of those things that gets rankles up, and that's the narrative of racism, the narrative of, how Black history and how our country's racial history has played out and how easy it is to change that narrative to make it sound better than it was and to somehow justify what was. And that's sort of like saying, I was trying to think of a good example without being really awful, but it'd be sort of like,
just do it.
I mean, I keep thinking of things like, rape and how, you try to turn a rape into a good thing by, saying, well, I mean, he was a really handsome man. Great. Fantastic. Yeah, that's wonderful. He's a really handsome man, and that should make me feel better about the rape, right? Or, he taught, after he raped me, he taught me how to basket weave, and I didn't know how to basket weave. And that's more appropriate for the one that we're talking about today, I think, ultimately, or at least the event that prompted me thinking about this. And I am talking about, and I called this up so I could read it exactly, but a few weeks back, Governor DeSantis out of Florida made a comment regarding a new rule or a set of curriculum rules that were put into place in Florida. And they have to do with how the curriculum is taught, the key points in their, talking about Black history and the things that have happened to African Americans over history. And let me just take a second here and call this thing. So here's the story. This is taken from Reuters, so hopefully, I guess I don't know enough to know whether or not people think Reuters is overly liberal or not, but Reuters has an international reputation of reporting the news. And so in Reuters, on July 20th, they reported that Florida's Board of Education has approved new guidelines for teachers on how Black American history should be taught, despite sharp criticism from some educators and civil rights groups. Among the new guidelines for educators are benchmark clarification, including one for the middle school students that states instruction includes how slaves developed skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. Let's think about that. Instruction includes how slaves developed skills, which in some instances could be applied for their personal benefit. So I want to address something right away on that. And this is the insidious way that a lot of this stuff works, is that there is, and people may hate me for this, but there is some grain of truth in that. And from my perspective, that's how lies really gain their power. They encompass just enough truth.
You broke up, so I didn't hear you, brother. I'm sorry.
That there's an issue with these kinds of statements is that they contain just a little grain, just a little smidgen of truth, and that gives them their power. These kinds of statements don't have any power if they're just flat out lies. I mean, people use flat out lies all the time, but what they'll do, and this is even more insidious, is by using things like Black people developed skills. Yes, there were skills, and in some instances could be applied to their personal benefit. Now, the example I saw later on is that the people that were slaves that learned how to be blacksmiths could then translate those skills as a blacksmith into other, things once they, were not slaves.
Remember, on that time, Blacks couldn't trade on the open, and in the antebellum age, Blacks couldn't even trade on the open market, so they had to barter for things. Yes, that skill did come about. However, how did it come about?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and when you think about it,
because the skill was taught to benefit the master in his household.
Exactly. Right. So you see what I mean? There's that grain of truth there that, that thing did happen, but you got to think about the context in which it happened. They were slaves. They didn't have a choice. If they didn't want to be
you didn't have a choice to learn it.
I don't want to be a blacksmith. It's going to hurt my hands. It's horrible. It's super hot. Anyone ever do any blacksmithing work? It's just some of the worst kind of work you can do. That's why machines do it now. So it's just I really hate how that sort of thing is done over and over and over again, where they take just some little thing that there's truth in that, but
and this is a kind of a tactic. You're starting to see this all over the place. It's like a playbook, they got, it's like you're trying to spin the thing. Of course, because the whole purpose of everything is to minimize Black history. It's the whole controlling of the narrative and what he's going to do. Because again, someone like us being 50 plus, right? We have read certain history books. We know history. We got books on our shelves. But now the younger generation who doesn't read or even care about history as much until they actually woke up, so to speak, the narrative could easily be implanted in them. And of course, it's just one of those things where, it's an old African proverb, right? It says, until the lions have their own historian, the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And of course, and that's basically a narrative, or is a metaphor for how groups with power and privilege control historical narratives. And that's what they're trying to do now.
Right.
And of course, the thing is, the attack on this thing is so blatant now. It's not even, we're trying to hide it. I mean, they might as well just say that we want to kill Black history. We don't like Black, brown, color people. We don't like people of color, period. They just need to just say, because that's the action says that.
Right.
And so it's like and then of course, again, trying to control the narrative. Because again, it's like white people, older, but let's say white people that are on the right, they're fighting with younger kids, the woke generation.
Right.
And so it's like we got conflict on every side now. And of course you get
it just irks me too how the minute they say in that section about that some instruction includes how slaves developed skills. Just break that down a little bit, okay? The minute you start talking about that sort of thing, what you're trying to do is as you said, minimize slavery. You're trying to minimize,
change the narrative of it.
Right. I mean, for anyone anywhere to think that anything about being a slave was like, the way they paint this, you would think there were Black slaves out in the, doing blacksmith work where they're going, oh, thank God my master taught me how to be a blacksmith. Because now when I'm not a slave, if I'm ever not a slave, I'll be able to be a blacksmith. I mean, it's so weird.
This is a narrative. Yes, because the narrative is flipped into like the 50s and 60s. Like if you go to YouTube and you look up some of these older white guys, even back in the 50s and 60s, it's one particular video that burnt my toast. It was a guy from South Carolina, light blue suit, talking about, the slaves liked it. They wanted to be here. And it's like, no, they did not. They had no choice. And of course, reason they like, well, and again, people don't really know the history because, like, when you talk about why slaves some ran, they were like, you know what, I'm getting out of here. But why some didn't run, it was called buck breaking. You tie a slave up to 4 horses and rip his body apart in front of his family, and then you tell the Black woman to teach the Black boy that if you do this, this is what's going to happen to you. And so that's why you kind of beat people into submission and just kill them, beat them into submission. And now the narrative wants to be changed. Because again, like even with this narrative, like, they gained some skill. They gained skills through racism, through slavery. They gained skills, but them same skills did not allow them to get homes when the Homestead Act came about. Because they were agricultural workers, they were indentured servants, and they were domestic servants. So they were disqualified for Homestead Act, getting free land.
Right.
So, and again, it's like, so for them to say that they gave us a skill or gave Black people a skill at that time, I'm trying not to cuss. I'm trying not to cuss.
Well, you're doing better than I would be doing. That's for dang sure. So,
but it's like, again, again, Dave Chappelle said this a few years ago when he came back on the scene. We live in the age of spin, deflection, projection, whataboutisms. It's a game. But the thing is the whole thing was perpetuated from one side of the fence.
Yeah.
They created this thing, this culture war. It's always been here. Let's just face that. But in 2016, it was made okay to say and show how you really feel about people.
Yeah. And people continue to do it in the most, angry, hateful ways possible.
Yes.
And I'm faulting the church as much as anything, if not more, because
I agree.
The Church of Christ sits back and lets it happen, and instead of standing up and saying, this is wrong, stop that.
Half of these militias are formed in these Southern white churches. They've actually got militias in their own little military teams.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part about this thing. This thing is happening in churches. But, let's go back to the church. We talk about, how Southern Baptists separated from the Northern Baptists because Southern Baptists own slaves and they wanted to keep them. And it's like, no, that doesn't go, that goes against the knowledge of God. But anyway,
right. Well, and you have,
but I'm with you when you say there's a fault on every corner.
Yeah. Well, and understanding how taking things and misconstruing and twisting them, that's an incredibly insidious thing that you have to. I mean, I seriously believe that kind of statement, that kind of twisting of truth around a well-crafted lie, an incredibly well-crafted lie, is satanic. I mean, there's just
it is. You absolutely. Thank you, brother, for saying that. The prince of the power of the air. Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, when you hear anyone say things like, well, some slaves were treated so nicely by their masters, they didn't mind at all. They were in good position. I'm like, wait a minute. They were slaves. What does that mean? In our country, it meant chattel slavery. It meant that if you were a slave, you were a thing. You weren't a person. Mm-hmm. You were 3/5 of a person. So what does 3/5 of a person look like in reality? That means that I don't have to treat you like a complete person because you're only 3/5 of a person. I mean, those fundamental principles are what we're talking about when we try to minimize slavery. And, I'm not banging people's heads. I get so tired of this argument too. Why do we have, everything is racist nowadays? You can't say anything without being racist. It's like, okay, take a step back.
I think that is a cop out. And also I think it's kind of false because, again, this thing comes from one side. And it's just like when people say they can't say anything anymore, who they speaking of?
Right. Well, there's the one case of a guy I work with.
Right now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying there's a guy that I work with who was just telling me, and I forget, I should look up the actual event, but there was a situation where a guy was delivering something, I think like a UPS driver or something, delivering something, and he said something to the guy delivering it, and the guy that, I forget if it was the guy that was being delivered to or having it delivered to, made a comment that the other person didn't hear because they actually had headphones at the time, but they construed it to be a racist comment. And it must have been the driver that made the comment, because that guy then lost his job as a result of having made a racial slur that he says he didn't make. And how would he know if he made it or not? Because the guy had headphones on. And it's like, so they'll use examples like that, which again, I can't attest to if that even really happened, because a lot of that stuff has become like urban myths that get put out there to make people feel like, oh, this is unjust too. Look at what happens to us.
It's reverse racism.
It's
like you were using that analogy the other day, like the assault victim becomes the problem, so to speak.
Right. Well, you shouldn't have been wearing that provocative clothing, right?
Right. But the thing is, what this whole thing is about with this the gentleman, I'm trying to be nice, DeSantis, that comment,
gentleman, again, of course, that is not a word. No. We'll maybe call him Mr. Okay, maybe
we have Mr. Okay, we have to love people, right? Because the Bible does say, pray for the authorities that are above you. All authority comes from Him. So I'm like, all right, Lord, all right. Even Him, and it's like, yep, even Him.
I don't like it, but I'll do it.
But what he's doing is like, what they're doing though is like they want to control the narrative, because the narrative, whoever controls the narrative controls the outcome. And of course, like with putting this stuff, they say, okay, like replacing the beatings and whoopings and all the hard work and things in the history books about slavery, and then replacing it with they learned skills, they were given housing, this and that and the other, and basically again they're minimizing history. But also, this is what you're doing: you're putting it in textbooks to create a collective memory, right? You take away one thing and replace it with another, then put it in a book, and then that's what we're teaching. That is good. That is the new history. Because like you say, if us right now, you and I don't know, 40, 50 years, Lord willing, we're still here, but I think we might be gone. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, that's what they'll be reading 30, 40, 50 years from now is, slaves were treated good. They were in this space. And that's that narrative that it has to be crushed right now. That's why there has to be such a defense right now, because again, that's what this is all about. It's basically taking racism or taking race out of basically taking the black struggle, black history, everything, and making it irrelevant, because the argument is always going to be for equity and equality and reparations. And so you want to minimize as you take away history, and because I look at this whole thing as running out the clock. You're kicking a can down the field. There's things that are old that I believe there's things that should be there should be some kind of reparation to people, but they're going to kick that can down the field and at the same time change the history behind it. So when actually the conversation is had, it's like, that's not needed. That's not necessary. So I think we have to really. I'm glad that to hear that the teachers and the professors and the educators are standing against this. And I just think more people, just non-educators, just us as people, need to stand against this as well, because again, it's not just happening in Florida.
Well, and get educated. That's that one of the things that worries me about Florida is there's unprecedented numbers of professionals leaving the state. Doctors, educators, professors are just bailing on the state because they can't tolerate what's going on. And I appreciate the sentiment of that. And at the same point, I would encourage people to bolster themselves up and stand and fight. Because if we run from the fight, the bully's going to keep getting stronger.
Exactly.
And the reality is that, some of these people, they're getting emboldened to the point where we're seeing things like a meteorologist in, Iowa that, quit his job because he was being threatened. His family was being threatened with bodily harm because he started talking about climate change. So if that can happen about something like climate change, which, if you believe it or not, just talk about, is it good to be doing what we're doing to our earth, that it's the only place we all have to live? Are there sensible things we're doing and nonsensible things? And, whether or not you believe that, we're making a difference in it or not, it still makes sense to just treat the planet and treat our environment, treat our resources with respect. Just believe that.
Why not use what the earth gives us for energy? The water, the current underneath can give us energy. The sun can give us energy without doing.
It's just so silly. So if they can do that, if they can drive weathermen out of their houses and jobs in Iowa, okay, not not some we're not talking Alabama or Mississippi. We're talking Iowa. So if they can do that for that in Iowa, am I saying that enough? Am I saying that with what are they going to do about this? Iowa. So Iowans, okay? How much more are they going to do something with something that really has some teeth to it, like slavery? I mean, do we belabor this too much? I don't think you can belabor something that is this big of a stain on our history. And I don't think it's going to get any better unless we admit that, there's a problem here. Look at, critical race theory. People are, losing their marbles at school board meetings because, we can't teach this critical race theory. It's Marxist and it's going to ruin our kids and it's just demonic and it's like, they're not teaching critical race theory in schools. They're not.
No.
Critical race theory is barely understood by PhD students at universities.
Right.
It's a discussion topic that asks people to look at factors in our society in our systems that may be encouraging or allowing racist ideologies to continue. Now, if there's none there, great. If we've done the research and we can show, great, not there, well, that would be one thing. But if we investigate it and we find that there is stuff there, again, let's just look at these things too. What keeps getting us in trouble as we go, I don't feel good. I'm a nice white person. I have black friends. I'm a good person. Okay. All right. Okay. You're a good person. It's not enough to be not racist anymore. You have to be anti-racist, and anti-racist means you come up against any shape, form of it. And you say, you know what? That's kind of a racist comment. You know what? That's kind of a racist policy. No, it's not. Well, let's take it apart a little bit and see. And now maybe you didn't mean it as a racist thing. I'll give you that benefit of the doubt. But the fact that you're getting all bent out of shape because I'm pointing out that it's racist is not a good sign. That's kind of like the alcoholic that gets told, don't you think you had enough, tequila right now? Oh, no, and I tequila. You make me, I know how I handle my tequila. Well, probably not a good time to talk to the tequila drinker. It's when they're like that, but.
And it's almost like when the teaching of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion really started to take form and take, like companies started to do it. Then the federal government acknowledged that they needed that training and all these kind of things. And then, of course, both sides that said, hey, we need this, we desire this. Great. Then the groups that said, this is not necessary. We don't need it. I don't like it. What they do, they take the context of it. It is almost like when you start talking about white privilege, you start talking about unconscious and conscious biases and things like that. It's almost like these things are done deliberately.
Yeah.
So you can spark up that was racist. No, it's not. And it's like, it's like a mocking. You know what I mean? Because it's like a mocking. And what we're talking about here is like it goes back to the Civil War, like we're talking about changing the narrative, right? Because the history books, even back then, it was going to reframe and reshape Americans' thought on slavery. Like they try to make the horrors of slavery into this positive institution. It's like, but that's not the case. And again, we're just seeing it being perpetuated now.
I'm just looking up something here. Laws prohibiting. There's a law that I don't think people realize just how far back this thing goes.
Yes.
And it's seeing if that comes up here. I believe it's back in laws it was on the Eastern Coast, like Maryland or Connecticut. And I've got to look that up. It goes way back that where it started in laws is several black people initially came to the country. I don't know how many hundreds it was, but they came because it was a land of new potential. They became very successful at things like tobacco farming. So there were some instances of that happening. Well, there was so much already systemic feelings of, we don't trust these people. They're dark skinned. They're not like us. That they passed a law that said if any black person was on the streets after 9 o'clock, they could be stopped and arrested by pretty much any white person. So there was already a system put in place to say, we don't like having these black people on the streets at night. We feel threatened by them. So we want the ability to arrest them and, tell them you have to stay off the streets. To have it be that far back that, this is, well before, anything like slavery, indentured servitude was there. But, I don't know if we probably were already importing people to have them work on plantations. But you can see how deeply that whole thing goes. And it's, I don't want to, I don't, not trying to self-flatulate either. I don't want to whip myself for being a white person. That's not the point. It's not, don't feel bad about being a white person. Feel bad about the fact that black people still are not getting the same shot at things.
And the thing is, all you want, I guess, at the end of the day, is for someone to acknowledge that, tell the truth about it. Because you think about even like, you ever seen the movie Rosewood?
No, I haven't.
about the slaughter in Florida. It's probably I can't remember the time frame, but it's either I almost want to say it's a little bit before Greenwood in Oklahoma.
Okay.
But at the end of the movie, of course, reparations were made for that community, all the people that got killed by the white mob. And then the United States government writes a letter in 2002 or 12 or whatever it was. And they acknowledge it, but they just apologize for it, basically. But they wouldn't acknowledge it because, again, in that letter, if they'd acknowledge it, they know that reparations were due to the rest of the country. But if you go, I'm almost going to have to go back and watch that movie just to get that letter from the government at the end. But again, it's just it's this narrative that it goes way back, even again, goes so far back, Have you heard of that lost cause narrative they were trying to do way back when?
Not ringing a bell.
Yeah, just pulled this thing up. And of course, I was reading before we came on. It was like talking about how white supremacists used textbooks as a vessel for neo-Confederate collective memory. During this period, neo-Confederates and reactionary and revisionary branch of American white nationalism campaigned for a narrative called Lost Cause, a myth which was a psychological response to the trauma of defeat. The Lost Cause attempted to preserve the honor of the South by casting the Confederate defeat in the best possible light. Two of the main components of the myth of the lost cause are that the South's concession from the Union had little or nothing to do with the institution of slavery, and number two, enslaved people benefited from slavery due to benevolent slave owners. That was a narrative that they tried to create even back in. They campaigned it.
Read that second part again about benevolence. I want to get that in my brain better.
The two myths were the South's concession from the Union had little or nothing to do with the institution of slavery, and two, enslaved people benefited from slavery due to benevolent slave owners. Doesn't that ring a bell to what that Joker is saying right now?
Yeah. Benefited. Yeah.
Benefited from slavery.
Right. I benefited. But
and again, like I said,
I'll give people the fact that when you really stop to think about those things, they're awful. They're just awful. There's no way to feel good about that. And I part of the problem we have, white people have, I know I even have it still, is that because we think of racism as being binary, we think of it being, if you're a racist, you're a bad person. And if you can say you're not racist, then you're a good person. And most good people don't want to think about them being bad people, themselves being bad people. Well, I don't know about you guys, but I'm 63 and I have long ago have accepted the fact that I try to be a good person, but there are times when I am not a good person. There are times when I might lose my temper. There are times when I'm super selfish. There are times when I, do things that I wish I hadn't done. And some of them I do over and over again. So, and yet I still try to cling on to the fact that I'm a good person for the most part, I hope. But I also know that any good that's in me doesn't come from me. So that acceptance of the fact that maybe I am still racist. And I know that I am because I can think of a year or so ago, I was walking down the street, walking my dog, and a young black man was walking down the street across from me and he had a hoodie on. And I had a reaction to that of being, I hope my. There was like a fear thing that started as a result of seeing a young black man with a hoodie on. And like, okay, what is wrong with me? What is wrong?
And again, it's like these things, these behaviors, these images, like, of course, like this one thing, like I'm in the northeast part, and of course of Wisconsin now, but we travel even to like places like Bloomer, Wisconsin, and I'm talking to people that have never met a black person in their life, but they have a preconceived notion or thought based on what they've seen on TV or what they've heard from another person. And again, it's like, this is like the human psyche, right? Where a person will believe a bad thing they hear before they believe a good thing they see. And then it's like, because you know how like they say, oh, a bad word spread faster than a good word, right?
Right.
So it's like we'll take that bad thing that we hear and we hold on to it. But yet, like say you're being shown a different behavior, a different attitude, a different character or characteristic or whatever. But yet you want to hold on to that bad word. So what you want to do is take that bad word and you want to try to reframe what you're seeing. And what happens to people? They become offended because what they are heard and what they're seeing don't match. And they're trying to make what they heard match what they see versus trying to make what they see match what they heard. You know what I mean? I'm saying it backwards, but
no, I mean, I think it's like when you have an argument, when I have an argument with my wife and she points out something about my behavior that's inconsistent with what I'm saying. And then I have to go, oh yeah, why is that inconsistent? But I usually don't go that way. What I do is try to prove that there is a reason why what I say I want and the inconsistent behavior are really the same thing. They really are. And the thing that I said is really true. And that behavior thing, well, yeah, I just hadn't really thought about how, and it's so common that for us to not want to admit that, well, my words should match my actions.
But I guess like what I was trying to explain though, brother, is like, and maybe I did a poor job of doing that, but all I'm trying to say is like, people will believe a bad word about something before they see the good in that same very thing. Okay. Like say we're talking like a black guy, in Bloomer, Wisconsin, I'm talking to these white folks and it's like, they're like looking shocked because I can complete a sentence. I got my hair cut. I'm shaved. It's like I got a belt on. And it's like my wife and I we're holding hands, and it's like what they saw just crushed their very perception or image of what they seen and heard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's where people like again. It's like some people become offended and they can't deal with that, so they'll just. Some people just tune out. They just like, I don't care either way.
Yeah. Or they try to find a way to make it fit their narrative.
Yep. There it is.
So they're just.
But the biggest thing.
Right. Well, yeah, there's something wrong there. They're just trying to look like they're, regular folks. They're not. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we can work our brains around, something we've already decided is true.
Absolutely.
The hardest thing to prove wrong is a person that believes they're right. So it's just it
started way back, with the dehumanization of black folks, with slavery, and then of course with that movie where it depicted slaves raping white women, and it just and that created the rage.
Yeah,
exactly. And then of course, because again, at the end of the day, this white supremacy is what this is what we're seeing at work right now. White supremacy. And it's got grassroots into lower case people, like say a lower class of people. It's rooted in the church, and then of course you got these people in government again. And that's the sad part, because like say a minority business owner going to a bank or whatever for a loan, and then you come across someone with the wrong mentality, it just sets you back. But white supremacy is alive, it's real, and it's well, and it's meant to distort the ideology, of how people think, and it's actually, and it's radicalizing some of these kids. And it's just sad, because again, it's like I just cannot gather or fathom how you can look at another human being and treat them like dirt and look at them like they're less than. No, I think I told this. No, I think I told this story before with you, Raul, but. There was it's just like treating people. It's like, okay, treating like it's like when we went out with a couple, they mistreated the server so bad that, we would never go out with that couple again. But also I had to go back and I just had to talk to that server and say, that's not how things really are. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, but with this thing, when we're talking about it's like you treating a person based on what they do for a living, not who they are as a person.
Yeah,
because that's what this thing is. You're looking at me based on the color of my skin, not who I am as an individual.
Right. Well, it takes time to get to know the individual. It's really easy to just pass. We tend to want to take the simplest path in most things. You mentioned the D.W. Griffith is the name of the filmmaker that made Birth of a Nation. And, there's yet another point where you can look at that in the, earlier 1900s, 14, something like that. And that film, it basically glorifies the Ku Klux Klan. They're seen as, the great warriors, the great defenders of white society and, civilization. And then there's a scene where one of the things that they do to show how they're keeping our society safe is there's a scene of a black man trying to rape a white woman. And in order to avoid getting raped, she throws herself off a cliff. The guy that is supposed to be a black man is a white man in blackface. So, they're taking a situation where, back then blackface was considered an acceptable thing to do for entertainment because you couldn't let black people perform. But there were times when you needed a black performance or, somebody that looked like black. And so they do blackface. So here they are in a movie doing the same thing. The most reprehensible thing is, as if that wasn't bad enough, President Woodrow Wilson at that time saw the film and decided that it should be shown at the White House. And it was given a private White House screening. And after seeing that, and you should look up the exact quote, but Wilson said that it was a great American film and that it should be seen throughout the land by everyone. So here you have a president. Woodrow Wilson is considered one of the more intellectual presidents we ever had. He's considered a great statesperson in so many ways. And yet somebody that was that educated could be led to make a decision after seeing a movie like that that's okay and that's actually a great film. And in fact, D.W. Griffith was renowned as one of the great filmmakers of the early film industry. He developed some techniques and things that are still used today, and he was a pioneer. All that good stuff, right? But it shows you, again, how this thing works. Here's an educated man who becomes president of the United States, and yet he can think and that this is a great movie. Well, okay, you can give him all kinds of, get out of jail cards. It wasn't that far after the Civil War, yada, yada, yada. I mean, there's, all kinds of excuses for that, but there really isn't any excuse. There really isn't. And we're still using the same dang excuses today to keep from thinking about how bad racism is. And if we were still doing things in our society, if we are still doing things in our society to make alcoholism okay, if we're still doing things to make perversion of children okay, if we want to do those things, we would stomp those out. We have enough collective conscience to realize that, no, you can't teach kids it's okay to become an alcoholic. You cannot. So why can't
turn
you
off some of these cartoons today are they're not cartoons no more.
No, and why would you allow something like that to be taught? And how is it different to allow racism to be taught as something where they learned good skills when they were slaves, and some of them were treated really well, and they would never run away because they enjoyed it so much. It's like, who's going to run away when they hear about their husbands being drawn and quartered? Who's going to run away? I'm not going to, and people yet still did. I mean, Harriet Tubman was a testimony to how many people did run away, and she thankfully did something to try to help them get safely away. But even then, I mean, it's just, I mean, I feel like I'm, I don't know, a lone voice in the wilderness or something, because I'm sure there are lots, if there are white people listening right now that are thinking, you're a traitor, you're not a real white person, you're one of those feminazis or whatever.
And the thing is, it's like I look at you, brother, and say that you are a man after God's own heart, man. You can confess your faults and you can actually get it right and go and not make the same mistake twice. Look at King David.
Oh, my wife would say, no, I'd make the same mistake twice. 3 times, 18
well,
times.
I haven't seen that mistake, but
I'm hiding it.
I honor you, brother, because I've seen nothing but good in you. But I want to read something here else, man. I saw this thing on racism. It says racism is, in fact, not just a byproduct of white supremacist ideology, but a subsequent culmination of ignorance and fear and a psycho-emotional detachment from the broader community of humanity and an holistic understanding of our tangible commonalities in life. therefore coerced to adapt to an unconscious bias and false reality. Does that sound familiar? Because, I mean, we've watched a alternate reality just pop up right before our eyes, right? And then that's the second part of this. It says this person who's writing, his name is Cuckoo. I can't pronounce the last name, but it's CUCU. But the second part of that is, in my opinion, racists are scared and filled with fear, loss, and emptiness that are often associated with the skewed understanding and purpose of human relationships. I also believe racists, as individuals with experiences of potholes in life, who has had an experience of rejection and or dejection. In other words, a racist is an individual who, in my opinion, is most likely challenged by identity crisis, low self-esteem, and mental weakness, a lack of belonging to a beloved community, thus forced to live the illusion of a manufactured consent based on false pretext and notion. Any thoughts?
Well, it seems to me there's a lot of things, a lot of ills in our world and our country and, everywhere that are fueled by insecurities.
And I agree.
And I don't know, of any real lasting security that comes from anywhere, but recognizing that we have a loving God.
And that's the thing.
I remember my mom on her deathbed, like a day or two before she died, she asked me, she didn't understand one of the things she had never figured out through her life. And my mom had been as good a Catholic girl as a Catholic girl can be. And, tried to, she did the rosary, she did novenas. I mean, she was on top of making her faith, putting some feet to it, some legs to it. But she said she'd never understood all of her life how God could let his son suffer the way that he did and to let him die like he did. And I said, Mom, you're missing the whole point. I said, God loved us so much that he gave his only begotten son so that we could be saved. That's how much that it's not about he loved his son. Of course he loved his son, and it broke his heart in every which way we can possibly imagine by letting his son be sacrificed. But he also knew his son was going to a better place at the end of the whole thing. But he loved him enough. He loved us enough to let that happen. So the same is true with, I think, any of these folks that are so insecure about things that they need to, lash out the way that they do, and they need to justify their biases so, vehemently and so dynamically that it comes down to just not loving yourself enough, not allowing yourself to be loved, to be able to say, yeah, I want to do something about it. That does happen. I do see that. I try not to participate in it myself. I really do. But I also know that I'm probably missing 90% of what happens around me and not standing up and saying, hey, you can't do that. As a person, you don't get to not put their change in their hand when you're putting everybody else's change in their hand. That's not right. What, are you afraid of touching a black person? What's the deal? I don't get it. You don't have to be combative to be, illuminating the situation. Maybe they're not even aware. I don't know. Maybe they are aware, but, call it out. Just like you'd call out bad behavior if a young man was leering at your daughter and, you could see, because you're a guy, you could see he's mentally undressing her and imagining how, fun it would be to hit that. Would you step out? Would any dad out there not step up and say, hey, you should look at my daughter that way. Don't you dare look at my daughter. Well, I wasn't doing anything. Yeah. I've seen that look. I've had that look. So I know what that look looks like, buddy. So, can we at least set up and say, okay, maybe I don't believe that it's all over the place, but maybe I need to start looking for it too. Maybe I need to start challenging my bias that says it doesn't exist, or that my bias that says, well, some black people really liked what they were. Okay. No. Really? Show me a black person. Please introduce me to a black person that says, oh, yeah, my great-great-great-great-grandma was a slave. She loved it. She was really sad when slavery ended. Show me that, okay? Because I can guarantee you're not going to find it. It's not okay. No one, no white person anywhere would want to be a slave. We would not choose it. We would not, because it means your property. And no one wants to be someone else's property and be treated like a chair. I'm done with that chair. That chair's worn out. It's got springs popping out of it. Get rid of it. Oh, well, if it's a black person, yeah. I mean, if they can't work anymore, if I've beaten them into the point where they can't work anymore, I can get rid of them. I can shoot them. I can do whatever I want because they're my property. No.
Well, yeah, man, that thing goes all the way back to Reconstruction, right?
Yeah. And before,
when we're talking about and before, absolutely, of course, with the Reconstruction, even like, again, just like the white Southerners who refused to adopt to the vision of a more racially just nation, right? They couldn't do that. So what they did to oppose it, of course, they used physical violence, a la Ku Klux Klan and whatever other groups, just racial violence. And they also used their political power too, to play the long game, to undo any kind of racial progress being made. And we see that today. Again, they've been playing this game forever. And the thing is, it's just amazing how we have not passed a voting law, even though the Constitution gives us the right to vote. But yet, why isn't there not a federal protection that gives us all the right to vote free and fairly? And that's, again, some of these things are so blatant because the things that are being fought against tells you who they are.
Right. We're cutting down the number of
how can you lose? I mean, well, of course, they're going to lose their power if more people of color vote against what they're doing because of the behaviors they've exhibited. Because, again, it goes back. They playing the political long game to undo any kind of racial progress. And we're praying. We're praying. This is why we pray, man.
Amen.
This is why we pray.
Things can't stay the way they are. I mean, if we want to talk about making America great again, let's make America great. Let's just forget about the again part of it, because that implies that somewhere we were better than we are now. And now is all we've got. So let's just make America great. We can't go back to the 50s. People say, like it was back in the 50s and the 60s. Oh, you mean like when they were still hanging black people? When they were still making it really hard for women to work out of the home? When they were making sure that, everyone everywhere, was just, treated like chattel? I mean, I don't know. I mean, you can look at any period of time and say, what was so great about that? I mean, you have fond memories of being a kid in the 50s and you think it was so wonderful. Well, if you were an adult back in the 50s, you probably have a much different view of what things were like back. Being a kid and having those rosewood glasses that see, how things we want to see. I don't know. I'm struggling here because this is just a tough topic, and it's another one we have to come back to, for goodness sake.
Let's come back to it.
It's just think about for a second how history is written by the victors. Any war that's ever taught to us, it's written by the victors. They didn't go back, to Napoleon's army after they lost the war in the 1700s in Waterloo and ask them what they thought about Waterloo. They talked about Waterloo from the standpoint of the victors. World War II, for all the things that happened in that, where do you find a story that says what the Nazis were really fighting for, or the things that they endured? People, where is that? It's the same throughout. Who's victorious in the history that's being written, right? Who wins in that?
Exactly. And again, it's like we think years from now, the narrative and what will be the story, if we don't fight right now to preserve history. And again, not for the sake of beating somebody over the head with it. It's just, hey, let's acknowledge the truth so we can heal and move on. Let's talk about the equity that is needed to make the scales balance. Let's talk about these things. Those are the hard parts to really. A person can admit, I've seen the wrong, but it's like the other things that come with it. That's where the hard part comes in, and that's where we got to get to. But we're gonna get there
next week. Next week we'll get there, right?
All right.
Well, that'd be nice if it did. So, hey, bro, love talking. Always a good time. Thanks to anyone listening to our rantings about the world as it should be, could be, would be. But hope you enjoyed the discussion. And if you didn't, go write some comments at www.4soc.com. And, please make them questions. The attacking of one another, no one's out here to attack. We're trying to understand. We're trying to answer questions that you might have. Or if you think that there's something we're way off base on, then present the information. I'm willing to admit I'm wrong. I have to do it just about every time I have an argument with my wife. So, it's just, I'm used to it. It's okay. It's not a bad thing to be wrong. That's how you become right. So, right? Antoine, you behave yourself, okay? Don't be clutching yourself with your hands so you're at your neck and shoulders again, okay? So,
I know, right? Yeah. Thanks, man.
All right, thanks, bro. See ya.
See you.